Okay, welcome to everybody that's dialed into this afternoon's webinar, or this morning, depending on where you're calling from. I think we should make a start. This afternoon's webinar is Executive Guide to Smart Ledger Geostamping. My name is James Pitcher. I'm the Program Director of the Distributed Futures Research Program. I'll give you a little bit more detail on that shortly. The agenda for the webinar is we're going to spend a little bit of time giving you an introduction into the research program, high-level summary of geostamping. We would like to encourage you to read the report in its entirety, so this will purposely be a very brief summary or executive summary of what geostamping is all about. There will be an opportunity to submit questions via email for those of you that are dialed in. If I can, I will answer them. But as a summarizer, it may be that I may need to refer to the experts and come back to you. But it'll all be logged by email, so we would really appreciate any feedback that you may have. The webinar is a summary of the report that we issued actually at the very end of last year. We are catching up on the reports that have already been launched with a series of webinars that have been spread over the last 4 to 5 weeks. And from October onwards, we will be following each report launch with a webinar very shortly after, probably a week to 10 days or so. So there's an opportunity for you to catch up, and the webinars that we have run previously on the other subjects are all available on the ZN Long Finance website. You can see the report either at the abbreviated address shown on the screen or indeed at ZN's Long Finance website. For those not familiar with the ZN Group, ZN is the City of London's leading commercial think tank, established in 1994. Long Finance is the pro bono research arm of ZN, comprising 4 major research programs: distributed futures, financial centre future indexes, and eternal coin and meta commerce. Okay, sorry, I understand there's a technical problem not seeing the slides there, so I'm just going to very quickly go back a couple of slides to see what happened there. So there's the introduction, that's me, that's the agenda, that's the report, and that's the little history that I was just giving of the ZN Group and Long Finance, so apologies for that. Let's carry on. So the Distributed Futures Research Program it evolved from a forum designed to share intelligence on fintech, regtech, and other interesting topics where disruptive technology meets finance. It's now an open source research program for smart ledgers and new technologies. Our research is structured around 4 themes of societal, technological, economic, and political, and directed at 4 outcomes that you can see there: expanding frontiers, changing systems, delivering services, building communities. The geostamping report falls quite clearly under the technology and expanding frontiers heading. The Distributed Futures Research Program is sponsored by the Cardano Foundation. The Cardano Foundation's mission is the promotion of developments of new technologies and applications, especially in the fields of new, open, and decentralized software architectures. Here are some examples of the reports that have already been launched this year. As you can see, we're developing, we hope, an identifiable brand. We've actually color-coded the reports and the subsequent documents that come out under each section based on the 4 themes that I described earlier. So technology, as you can see from the geostamping report, is blue, political is green, economic red, and social is yellow or amber. This is quite small print, so you may not be able to see all of the detail, but this gives you an idea of the scope of the research. We have 4 or 5 more reports that are being launched this year. All will be available on the Long Finance website, so please do peruse. As you can see, we have a wide range of smart ledger topics under each of the 4 themes planned, and a lot of them are underway already, so we'll be issuing further reports over the coming months. With cryptocurrencies constantly in the news, you're probably all aware of the underlying technology, blockchain. We thought it would be useful to provide context in hopefully very simple terms. So a ledger, obviously, is a record of transactions that becomes distributed, mutual, and then mutually distributed, as you can see. And the key for a mutual distributed ledger technology is an immutable record stored in multiple locations, just above blockchain there. Blockchain, as everyone appears to know, is a transaction database shared by all nodes participating in a system based on the Bitcoin and, of course, many other now protocols. And so it's a smart ledger. It's an MDL, or mutual distributed ledger, with an embedded executable code. Executable code, sorry. And those obviously are the key words here. ZN has been researching smart ledgers for many years now. This slide, that's been around for some time, gives an idea of the opportunities covered by our research and indeed by smart ledgers. Interesting and perhaps appropriate that currency or cryptocurrencies is just one of the many areas identified where there are immense promise and opportunities for the application of smart ledgers. One that may resonate with you and certainly me in the second box there is around land and property titles. Land registry, for example, as part of conveyancing, is a hugely complex process that has probably impacted most of us in our lives. If you think of all of the parties that are involved in that process and why it takes so long, so buyer, seller, estate agent, mortgage providers, lawyers, land registry, and so on. All of these parties are involved in extracting or providing data at various links along that chain, and of course at great cost and taking a huge amount of time. So there are obvious efficiencies to be gained if all of this information, particularly around land registry and the purchase and sale of properties, was on a blockchain, which perhaps is then a good segue into what we're here to talk about today, which is an executive guide to smart ledger geostamping. And it really is an executive guide. I actually, for this report that was launched at the beginning of December, we actually summarized a 100+ submission to a scientific journal. So this summary really is an attempt to simply describe at a very high level to the layperson, if you like, what we're talking about in terms of geostamping and how that can be of use to everyone. So it's also the reason why I mentioned that if you do have a very technical question that I can't answer, I'll investigate and reply to your email, but I will have an opportunity to try and answer your questions at the end. So we're going to start actually with a very simple poll before I get into the definition of geostamping. Just bear with me 1 second. And so here's the first question for you, if you could please answer it accordingly. Do you know what geostamping is? That's just updating the entrance. I'll give you an idea in a second. So some people are either voting twice or changing their mind, but it's pretty much holding at around 30% yes, 55% I have an idea, and 15% no. So hopefully one way or another we're going to be able to clarify that or help you or surprise you, or perhaps you might want to challenge it. And so the definition in the report is this. A geostamp is a digital record of the geographic location of a transaction, or in other words, a timestamp with a geographic location attached. Simply put, the adoption of a limited number of consistent geocoding structures that have global applicability could increase interoperability of smart ledgers. Hence the name on the full name of the report. So smart ledger geostamping steps towards standardization. We all like, I think, an easy to remember acronym. And we believe that the principal qualities of a good geostamp can be encapsulated in the MAPS acronym contained in the report, and there clearly the pun is intended. What does MAPS stand for? Memorability. A geocode should ideally be compact and memorable. Aggregation. Coding systems should be able to describe comparably a variety of areas, structures, so on and so forth. Proximity. Similar codes should represent similar locations so that the people exchanging codes can roughly understand the distance and relationship between them. And scale. Users should have control over the precision of a geostamp. I'm going to provide you with some illustrations of each of these as we proceed, and there's of course far more detail in the report itself. So remember that smart ledgers are mutual distributed ledgers, aka blockchains, with embedded executable code. So how and why is geostamping relevant? Well, smart ledgers are able to specify rules about the use of data within the MDL. For example, release this ship's location 4 hours after it has been recorded on the MDL. So if we think of those opportunities described earlier, the many words on that one page, you begin to have an idea of the potential business, commercial, analytic applications, some of which are shown in the diagram on this slide. And of course, there are many others. Zien has developed a tool which demonstrates how this can be applied. The tool is called GeoGnomo. You can see the link to the website there. This is an open source application that you can view and use at any time, and is designed to give you a much better understanding of how geostamping is built, and also the practical uses, which I'm going to look very briefly at now for you. So let's look at the possible uses using the MAPS acronym I mentioned earlier on. So firstly, M, memorability. A geocode should be compact and memorable, and could be the exact destination for a parcel delivery, for example. So on the left-hand side there, you can see a small area of the City of London. You can see the GeoGnomo code that would be applied to that. On the right-hand side, you could see a zoomed-in version, and that's simply reflected in terms of the code by an expansion of that same code. If you were by comparison, for example, to look at the latitude and longitude codes for the area shown as A, B, C, D on the table on the right, the numbers and the coding involved would actually run into almost a full paragraph of numbers for the various latitude and longitude codes. So already you can see the advantages in applying a geostamp, and why memorability is important. Secondly, aggregation. So a coding system should be able to describe comparably a variety of areas, sizes and structures, as I mentioned earlier. So for example, if an organization wants to know what happened within a specified location over the last year, this is something that can be used. So it may be that in a particular location, a certain number of aircraft flew over. There are 10,000 mobile phone numbers recorded, 3 robberies, a care worker attended 6 addresses. This illustration is that you can see on the slide is somewhere in between the other two, and has some obvious analytical and commercial uses. Thirdly, proximity. Similar codes should represent similar locations so that people exchanging codes can roughly understand the distance and relationship between them. So, for example, adopting this protocol, neighboring shapes will share similar geocodes. So when faced with multiple geocodes, one can tell roughly how far they are away from each other. So someone living in area F49PU10, for example, will know that they are fairly close to someone living in an area F49PX10, whereas someone living in F49PW12 will know they are very close to someone living in an area F49PWJ12, 1 letter difference. Conversely, on the right-hand side, someone living in Jakarta, Indonesia, will have an entirely different GeoGnomo code, as you can see. And finally, from the MAPS acronym, scale. Users should have control over the precision. So allowing the size of the areas to vary enables adaptation as to why the geostamping is being used. So we can, for example, use small area geocodes to keep track of the location of a computer, perhaps, as per the left-hand side, and larger area geocodes to keep track of the area of a land that a farmer owns. These examples, as you will have seen, used a combination of triangular and rectangular shapes. And the tool that ZN has developed, GeoGnomo, has developed 3 methods, and is working on a 4th actually, for geocoding to use rectangular, or 2 use rectangular areas, 1 uses triangular areas. I'm just going to give you a very brief example of those in a second. And you can see that each of them has differing levels of adherence to our MAPS acronym, for example. And so the method used will depend on the intended or potential use or application. So as demonstrated, geostamping is typically constructed from letters and numbers and can be accessed at different levels depending on the detail required. And on the tool that ZN has developed, this is actually very easy to zoom in and out, very similar to doing so on a Google map, for example, just by changing the scale of the code. Here again then are some illustrations of how these various systems might look on your system, and again I would encourage you to go to www.geognomo. So we have method 1, the Quaternary Triangular System, or QTS. Sorry, I should leave that just for a little side, have a little pause there. And you can see how that starts off on a global basis and goes right down to a very small compact area, as you might imagine. Method 2 is the Quaternary Rectangular System, QRS, which obviously allows for slightly different shapes of areas of review. And method 3, a variable rectangular system, which effectively extends those shapes a little bit to capture certain aspects, again, depending on what you're looking for. So as I mentioned, GeoGnomo, it's open source, it's free for everyone to use. The details of how to do so are on the GeoGnomo website. And indeed, there are other things to consider as geostamping and indeed GeoGnomo evolves. Other shapes, for example. Hexagons are very popular when it comes to maps and references, but do not subdivide into other hexagons. So complicated to develop, but perhaps slightly more adherence to the MAPS protocol that we talked about. Words can also be used as codes for small geographical areas. There have been ongoing attempts to encapsulate specific areas with memorable words or groups of words. And we will continue to look at this as part of GeoGnomo, which could, for example, be developed to assign a word or words, perhaps even short sentences, to pre-selected areas. I think the key here is that we don't lose the facet of proximity, which there are 1 or 2 other systems out there that do capture words, but you can't really align one area to its neighbor. But the words or phrases could then be as specific and relevant as required. Altitude, interestingly, next generation geocoding applications might include 3-dimensional virtual globes that will allow a broad spectrum of users, including scientists, businesses, and individuals, to interactively visualize, analyze, model, manipulate, and generate, let's say, geospatial big data. But watch this space, I think, on this one. So I did say that this would be a short demonstration. I hope that you have found that useful. The executive summary is just that, but does go into a little more detail than I have today. So I very much hope this has been useful for you and an insight at the high level into what geostamping is and the applications of it. I'm just going to run a second second of the two polls, if you wouldn't mind just answering this question, and that'll help me give an idea as to how successful this we've been in that regard. So that's launching now. If you could just answer, that would be great. I'll give you a few more seconds to let that run. Okay, good. So we're looking at around 45% saying yes, 35% saying largely, and some to some extent. And thankfully, none of you have said no, which is very good to hear. So thank you very much for that. I have finished with a few minutes to spare. If you do have any questions, now is your chance to submit them via email. I can't see any out there at the moment. Give it a few seconds. Okay, so I have a question from Pedro that says, would including timestamp information on the geocode make any sense, or is it better kept as separate data? Well, my answer to that is yes, it would make sense, and your question is very timely, pardon the pun again, Pedro, because on Friday of this week, we're actually doing a webinar that's looking at timestamping specifically. So I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to sign up to that. On that one, we do actually have our timestamping expert and the author of that report giving a little bit more detail. So yes, I think is the answer, Pedro, and do sign up to that. I've got a question from Maitland Davies. It says, is there a copy of the presentation available? Absolutely, that will be on the website. I'm looking at my colleague here, probably within the hour, if it's not already. I'll just give it another few seconds, see if any more questions come in. Okay, so rather than hold in silence, it looks like hopefully I've answered all of your questions as we've been through this brief introduction and executive summary of timestamping. But if not, please do email me. My address was on the front cover of the webinar today. I'll pull that up actually back on screen so that you can see. Okay. So there's my email address, james_pitcher@zn.com. If you do have any questions that you can think of afterwards, please do send them to me. And also, if you have any feedback, good, bad, or ugly, as they say, I would be very happy to receive that. And we would certainly take any feedback on board. So thank you once again for dialing in this afternoon and listening to us. If you would like to dial into the timestamping related webinar that's happening on Friday. If you haven't already done so, please sign up, and we look forward to hopefully speaking to you then as well. Thank you very much.